Little technical difficulty. While some may not have teenagers anymore, perhaps you had them before, now perhaps you have grandchildren who are teenagers, or maybe even great-grandchildren that are teenagers, or in the case of Brother Billy, great-great-great-grandchildren who are teenagers. And Daniel wrote about that because Daniel was a teenager, and I'm pretty sure Brother Billy knew him personally, so it's all good. He and I have a good time talking about his age. So anyway, you know, when we frame our values, when we look at our values in terms of God's Word and in terms of God's principles and in terms of God's ultimate design, then we can understand it better. He created us, He made us, so He understands us better than we understand ourselves. Students, He understands you better than you understand yourself. College students, He understands you better than you understand yourself. Parents, He understands your kids better than you do. Right? He knows more about raising your kids than you do. Now, we've been told, you know, that the government and the schools and everyone else are better at raising our kids than parents. And we know that that's not true, right? We understand that God put us in their life as their primary instruction. You know, the way students talk is weird. I used to be a youth pastor before I was a senior pastor. And what they say, old youth pastors don't know. Old youth ministers don't die. They just go out to pasture, right? Pastor. Anyway, so I was around students back in my 20s and on into my 20s before I became a grown-up pastor, I guess is what you'd call it. I'm not sure what you'd call it. But anyway, and I found out something that is still true today. And that is students have their own language. They do. They speak a different language. It may be a form of English, but it is a completely different language. And once adults start figuring it out, listen to me. Tell me if I'm right or I'm wrong. Look at me. Look at me. Tell me if I'm right or I'm wrong. Once we adults figure out the language, you go and change it on us, don't you? Because you're not going to speak the same language as we do. It just doesn't happen. It's a language that only teenagers, only they can use. But here's the good news. That was sort of the bad news, but the good news is this. You don't have to talk like a teenager to talk to teenagers. You don't have to know the lingo. You don't have to be cool. You don't have to be whatever the word is of the day. You don't have to be to talk to them. So for just a few moments this morning, I want us to look at the heart of teenagers. I would guess that there's not a person in here that doesn't have a teenager that they care about. And they want to see succeed, and want to see grow, and want to see prosper, and want to see walk with the Lord, and know the Lord, and move forward. Sometimes that's a challenge, y'all. Sometimes dealing with students, with teenagers especially, it's a challenge. They'll break your heart. They'll make you laugh, right? They'll make you feel young at heart. But they'll also break your heart sometimes. And so, let's look from a teenager. Daniel was a teenager when this story begins. It takes us from when he's a teenager all the way until he's a very old man. But in the beginning, he's a teenager that's doing an amazing work for God. An amazing thing that God had laid out before him. And let's look at his heart, and let's look at the heart of a teenager. You know, Gallup recently surveyed 500 teenagers and asked them a question. What one thing would you rate as the most important thing in your life? Now, my ears perked up when I read that, right? When students who I care about and you care about, when teenagers that I care and you care about, when 500 of them are asked a question as poignant as this, what one thing would you rate as the most important thing in your life? 9 out of 10. Very rarely, if you get 500 of anything, kids, teenagers, adults, senior adults, very rarely will you get 9 out of 10 say basically the same thing, and that is, a good family life is most important. Think about that for a minute. Reader's Digest commissioned the Roper Center for Public Opinion Research to ask 1,022. Now we've upped the ante, right? We've gone from 500 to 1,022 teenagers aged 16 to 18. Says, what source of satisfaction is very important to you? 94% said raising healthy and happy children. It's on their mind already as teenagers. Family is. And 91% of them augmented that by saying having a good marriage. So what am I saying? I'm saying this. 90% of teenagers deeply desire a good family. And it's coursing through the veins of teenagers today. They want to be part of something bigger than themselves. They don't want to be loners. They want to have a good family. They want to have a great family life. They want to raise a family themselves one day. So we're going to look at the framing values, if you will, for teenagers from one of the greatest teenagers of all time. And his name, of course, is Daniel. I think most of us would love to have had a teenager like Daniel for a kid, right? Mothers, you would love to have a kid like Daniel come to date your daughter, right? You would love to have one with manners and with principles. I think most of us would love that. He was honest. He had integrity. He was pure. So here is a biblical perspective on how to have a teenager like that. And we'll read, first of all, in God's Word from Daniel chapter 1, verses 3 down through verse 21. Read along with me in your copy. In Daniel 1, verse 3. Then the king instructed Ephinaz, the master of his eunuchs, to bring some of the children of Israel and some of the king's descendants and some of the nobles, young men in whom there was no blemish, but good-looking, gifted in all wisdom, possessing knowledge and quick to understand, who had ability to serve in the king's palace, and whom they might teach the language and literature of the Chaldeans. And the king appointed for them a daily provision of the king's delicacies and of the wine which he drank, and 3 years of training for them, so that at the end of that time they might serve before the king. Now from among those of the sons of Judah were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. You know them better as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, the last three. I don't know why we remember those three by those names and Daniel by his Hebrew name, but we do for some reason. To them, the chief of the eunuchs gave names. He gave Daniel the name Belshazzar, to Hananiah, Shadrach, to Mishael, Meshach, and to Azariah, Abednego. But Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's delicacies, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the chief of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. Now God had brought Daniel into the favor and goodwill of the chief of the eunuchs. And the chief of the eunuchs said to Daniel, I fear my lord the king, who has appointed your food and drink. For why should he see your faces looking worse than the young men who are your age? Then you would endanger my head before the king. So Daniel said to the steward, whom the chief of the eunuchs had set over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, please test your servants for 10 days, and let them give us vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then let our appearance be examined before you, and the appearance of the young men who eat the portion of the king's delicacies. And as you see fit, so deal with your servants. So he consented with them in this manner, and tested them 10 days. And at the end of 10 days, their features appeared better and fatter in flesh than all the young men who ate the portion of the king's delicacies. Thus the steward took away their portion of delicacies and the wine that they were to drink, and gave them vegetables. As for these 4 young men, God gave them knowledge and skill in all literature and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. Now, at the end of the days when the king had said that they should be brought in, the chief of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar. Then the king interviewed them, and among them all none was found like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore they served before the king. And in all manners of wisdom and understanding, about which the king examined them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and astrologers who were in all his realm. Thus Daniel continued until the first year of King Cyrus. Here's a biblical perspective, students. Here's a biblical perspective, parents, grandparents, anyone who deals with students and teenagers. Here it is. Here's the first thing. Look at me. From this passage, I want you to understand what to teach your teens. What to teach your teens. There are 4 qualities that we find in the life of Daniel that I think that we should all be teachers, should all be instructors of in the life of our kids, but all the way up through our teenagers. The first one is this. Because, in kids, yes, they can have a portion of this, but really their adulthood and their values are really being framed when they are teenagers. They really start to be able to understand and think through the future and what's next in their life and the person that they're going to be. And the first one is we need to raise teenagers of conviction. Conviction. That's the first thing we see about Daniel's life, right? He had a conviction that he was not going to drink the wine and eat the delicacies of King Nebuchadnezzar. In that same survey I cited earlier, teenagers were asked, are your values the same as your parents? 76% of them said that their values were basically the same as their parents. Would you agree, students out there? Pretty much? Your values pretty much echo that of your parents. Parents, you have a tremendous responsibility. Look at me. Grandparents, parents. If you're involved in a teenager's life, in a supervisory role, in a leadership role, in a parental role, pass your values on to your teenagers. It is so important. Don't settle and let the world pass its values on your teenagers. Don't stand back and say, I'm going to let them be the person that they're going to be. No, you have a responsibility to lead your children, to raise them, to pass your values along to them. From the very beginning in Babylon, Daniel was tempted to compromise so many times, compromise everything that he had learned since he was born as a Jewish child. Daniel was now in a pagan land, far from home, the pagan land that had no room for God and no time for God. He went to a school that did not begin its day with prayer as he would in a Hebrew school. The 10 Commandments were not hanging on the wall there in the Babylonian school like they would be in a Jewish school. The very idea that there was a God was rejected by the Babylonians. Every effort was being made to indoctrinate Daniel and his friends into the world's way of thinking. Does that sound familiar? Does it not sound like exactly what is happening in our culture today? The world wants to say that religion, especially Christianity, is old-fashioned, is backwards, and nothing but a bunch of redneck backwards people believe that the Bible is actually the truth. That actually God created the heavens and the earth. Only backwoods, dumb-thinking people would ever think that. That people are telling our kids and our grandkids that every single day. You have a responsibility to counterweight that, and you have the ability to counterweight that if you don't abdicate it to them. What did I say? What did it say? 76% of teenagers say they have basically the same values as their parents. Wow. Daniel 1, 3, and 4 reminds us of this, right? We just read it, but look again at verse 3 and 4. Then the king instructed Ahasuerus, the master of the eunuchs, to bring some of the children of Israel and some of the king's descendants and some of the nobles, young men who were there was no blemish. They were good looking, they were gifted in all wisdom, possessing knowledge and quick to understand. And then in verse 6 and 7, he reminds us again what they were. Now from among them were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So understand, none of this was a real problem to Daniel because he knew who he was. And he knew what he was going to stand for. He knew what he believed. He had been raised in that Jewish home before they were taken away to captivity. The problem began in verse 5, and he wouldn't eat of the meat and drink for two reasons. First, the food was forbidden by God for him to have. And he took what God said seriously. Secondly, that food had been dedicated to another heathen god, and he was going to have no part of it, no matter how good it tasted, no matter how much of a blessing it would be to actually sit down and cut a thick ribeye and drink a bottle of Chateau du Monde or whatever. I don't even know the name of the wine. The fact of the matter is every day your teenager is going to be hit with the hammer of compromise. Just a little bit here, and a little bit there, and a little bit there. Not anything major. The food's still good, right? A hammer of compromise. Oh, just a little sip, not going to hurt anything. The hammer of compromise. The only thing that will stand is a wall of conviction that you parents have built in their heart. Wow. So conviction is the first quality that we see in Daniel that we need to instill in our teenagers. Secondly, character. Character. Verse 8 says, Daniel purposed it in his heart. This is referring to character. That's all it is. The heart of your character is the character of your heart. You are the person you are today because of the character that you had in your life yesterday, right? See, Daniel had a choice to make that revealed his character. He had a choice to make. Listen, look at me. Look at me. Choices don't build character. Choices reveal character. Hear me. Choices don't build character. Choices reveal character. Character demands a commitment to do what is right no matter what it might cost. No matter if they're going to kick you out of the palace. No matter if you may not get any food at all and they may starve you to death for standing up for what you believe in. No matter if you won't get the perks anymore of living in the king's house. No matter. We're going to stand up for what is right. Character demands a commitment to do what is right no matter the cost. And character depends upon believing in an absolute right and an absolute wrong. That's another place that our society and our culture have missed the mark. We failed to pass on to the next generation that there is an absolute right, there's an absolute wrong. Now there are gray areas in this world. We know that. We understand. But when it comes to God, when it comes to decisions about the right and wrong, there is a right and there is a wrong, and God has decided which is which. You believe that this morning? Amen. Conviction, character, listen, courage. Courage is another attribute that we need to instill in our students. Daniel used one of the greatest words that you can teach your children. What do you think it is? A little two-letter word. No. If you can teach your kids how to say no when the temptation comes, when it's easier to say yes, you have done something. You see, the only reason he could say no to the world is because he had said yes to God. We need to lead our kids to know the Lord. Even though this was a good decision and the best decision he could make, it was not an easy decision he could make to say no to the king. You see, this was an insult to the king for him to turn down this food. Nobody else was getting this food. Even the rich people couldn't afford this food. This was food essentially that only could be eaten in the palace of the king. Wine that could only be gotten in the palace of the king. And to say no to that was to almost spit in the face of the most powerful man in the world. And he also had to deal with peer pressure, because it says that some of them, during that testing time, right, some of them went ahead and ate the food and drank the wine, right? And he had to have somebody compare these 4 Hebrew children to, right? So after 10 days, they inspected those that had been eating those portions for the king, and 10 days to inspect these 4, and they found out that God had done a work. But I guarantee you that there was peer pressure among that other group, right? Peer pressure is strong. Peer pressure is powerful. I've seen people do things that they would never even consider doing until that peer pressure was applied onto their life. Day in and day out and day in and day out. And finally they just said, I'll let it go. Come on, Daniel. We're all doing it. Look how good we are. Look, we're happy. We feel a little tipsy in the evening, right? That's a good thing, right? No, it's really not. We need to teach them conviction. We need to teach them character. We need to teach them courage. We also need to teach them courtesy. That is a lost thing in students. It really is. And I'm not just talking about yes sir, yes ma'am, please, and thank you. I'm talking about a courtesy that comes out of Christian character. Daniel stood his ground, but he didn't do it arrogantly. He didn't do it boastfully. He didn't do it rudely. Look at verse 11 through 13 again. I think we can learn a lot. This was a difficult situation. He was making a difficult decision, but as he answers him, even he says this, so Daniel said to the steward, whom the chief of the eunuchs had set over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, please test your servants for 10 days, and let them give us vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then let our appearance be examined before you, and the appearance of the young men who eat the portion of the king's delicacies. And as you see fit, so deal with your servants. This was not some snot-nosed kid standing up and saying, I ain't going to do it just because you told me to do it, right? That's not the way Daniel handled it, was it? Even in a tough situation, he handled himself with grace and with courtesy and respect for the authority that was placed over him. We're missing that a little bit in our culture today, aren't we? He didn't stage a protest or a sit-in. He didn't make a Molotov cocktail and start firebombing the palace or the banquet hall. He very much politely proposed an alternative. He used his mind, but he also used the good graces that God had given him. That's the four of the things we learned from Daniel we need to teach our teenagers. Conviction, character, courage, and courtesy. But the second thing, and this is a little more relational, and we're almost out of time, and I'll hurry through, how to reach your teenagers. How to reach your teenagers. 3 words to remember that I guarantee you will help you reach your teenagers. First one is this: love them. Teenagers respond to that. I mean, genuine love for them better than anything I've ever seen. And it hasn't changed since the days of Daniel. Love them. Above everything else, your teenager has to know that your love for them is unconditional. It doesn't depend on whether they're good or bad. You're still going to love them. It doesn't depend on whether they make straight A's or not. You're still going to love them, right? It doesn't. If they leave their room in a wreck, yes, you're going to discipline them, but you have to love them, and they have to know that you love them with an unconditional love. You know, many of you have been given the opportunity, or will be given the opportunity, to prove that you love your child unconditionally. If your daughter comes home and says, I'm pregnant, or your son comes home and says he's been arrested for drunk driving, let me tell you something. Your love is on the line in those situations. Long after the bad choices have been corrected and the wrong moves are in the past and they've moved on with their life, that teenager is going to remember one thing. When I needed mom and dad the most, did they stand by me? Did they love me? Did they not support the actions that I did? That's a whole other matter. But did they love me and care enough about me not to throw me away and put me out with the wolves. That's on the line. Because let me tell you a little secret. Teenagers are going to mess up. They're going to miss the mark. Love them. Secondly, and I take the fifth on this, I'm preaching to myself more than anybody else. My wife would agree. Listen to them. The reason most teenagers don't talk is because their parents won't listen. Right? Again, I stand on the fifth in this manner. I don't want to incriminate myself. The average parent is outstanding at lecturing, but very poor at listening. Learn to listen. Learn not to interrupt. Learn not to jump to conclusions, right? And listen to what your teenager is saying. Love them. Listen to them. Listen. Just as important as those two things, lead them. Lead them. God has given you the responsibility to lead your teenagers. Your primary calling when your kids become teenagers is to not be their buddy. It's to be their parent. I hear people say, my teenager, they're my best friend. Well, maybe later on you can be best friends, but right then they don't need a best. They got plenty of friends. They only got two parents. And they need you to stand in the gap, even when you're not popular, even when what you say isn't exactly what they want to hear. A lot of parents are afraid to set boundaries because they're afraid they'll alienate their kids. Get over that, okay? You may alienate your kids, but somebody's got to set boundaries for teenagers. And by the way, nothing can be further from the truth in the long run. Listen, did you know that parental involvement is the single most critical factor that affects sexual activities in teenagers? It reminds me, and this is an illustration about little kids, and we'll close up here.